What if something we often think is, uniquely human like learning by watching others? Copying them isn't just common out there, but actually vital, like critical for survival across the whole animal kingdom.
It's a fascinating idea, isn't it? Really challenges how we see ourselves and other creatures.
Yeah, this simple act of copying seems to unlock this incredible adaptability for all sorts of animals.
Absolutely, from the tiniest insects to the biggest whales.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today, the amazing world of social learning in animals.
Our mission, really, is to unpack these ingenious ways that animals pick up crucial knowledge from each other.
We've gathered some really interesting research articles that shed light on this, and honestly, some of it goes against long-held scientific beliefs.
It really does. It shows this profound adaptability of life.
Okay, so let's unpack this. When we talk about surprising learners, maybe we should start with the humble rat.
Ah, the rat. Good starting point.
Even Charles Darwin, way back in Descent of Man, he had this inkling, didn't he? He noticed it was hard to keep catching animals in the same trap or poisoning them with the same stuff.
He wrote, "They must learn caution by seeing their brethren caught or poisoned." Quite insightful.
And that really gets to the heart of why the brown rat, Rattus norvegicus, has been so incredibly successful.
It does. And fun fact, that name is misleading. They're originally from China, not Norway.
Right. And from China, they've spread, everywhere, haven't they?
Pretty much. Every continent except Antarctica.
Yeah.
It's genuinely one of the most successful non-human mammals out there.
And so adaptable, you find them eating garbage in Alaska.
Or living off seabirds on remote islands like South Georgia. Just amazing resilience.
Which explains why humanity's long, often brutal battle against them. Well, it hasn't exactly worked, has it?
No, centuries of traps, poisons, fumigation, they persist.
Why? Why haven't we ever managed to get rid of this most perseverant of pests?
Well, it comes down to there. You can call it sagacity, caution, cunning. They are incredibly wary of anything new.
How does that manifest? Like, if they see new food?
Oh, they approach it so slowly. Stalking it, crouched low, ready to bolt. Extreme apprehension.
And they don't just dive in.
Not at all. If they try it, it's sporadic at first. Tiny amounts only.
Okay, so that explains why those early poisons often failed. They required a big dose.
Exactly. The rats would eat just a little, maybe get sick, but not die.
And that just taught them, okay, avoid this stuff.
Precisely. It inadvertently trained them. Bait acceptance would plummet, and the colonies bounced right back.
So they were learning, just not what we wanted them to learn. Then warfarin came along in the 50s. That must have seemed like a breakthrough.
It was, for a time. Its action is slow, so the rat feels sick much later, long after eating the bait. It bypassed that immediate bait shyness.
Not a permanent solution?
Nope. Used globally, but always with partial success. Survivors eventually evolve genetic resistance. Nature finds a way.
And this ongoing struggle, this difficulty, actually pushed researchers to look closer, right? Like Fritz Steiniger in Germany.
Yes, he provided some early data supporting Darwin's social learning idea for rats.
But the real deep dive came later with Jeff Galef.
Ah, Jeff Galef. Canadian psychologist, the world authority, really. Over 30 years, he and his students did these just beautifully designed experiments.
And what did they find? What was the big insight?
It was a real aha moment.
Yeah.
Rats don't primarily learn by avoiding food that made others sick. Yeah. That happens, but it's not the main driver.
So what is?
They acquire really strong preferences for foods that healthy rats have eaten. It's about positive reinforcement, learning what's safe and good from others.
Wow. Okay. That's a fundamental shift. It's not just fear, it's seeking out what works.
Exactly. And that's how they build these efficient, colony-wide dietary traditions. It's incredibly effective.
Right. So knowing what they learn, the next big question is, how on earth do they transmit this? It's not like they have cookbooks.
No, definitely not. But the mechanisms are surprisingly complex. Multiple, diverse, subtle ways.
Like what? Does it start early?
It starts even before birth. Flavors from the mother's diet get transferred to the fetuses in the womb.
Oh, seriously?
Yep. And then through her milk after birth. So pups are kind of pre-programmed with preferences. Think about, say, garlic. If mom eats it, the pups are more likely to accept it later.
Okay, wow. And after they're weaned?
Then they learn by sticking close to adults. They tend to eat only at food sites where adults are present, following their lead, picking up cues. Even if they're alone later, they'll prefer foods they saw adults eating.
So direct observation is key. What about, like, remote information?
That too. Rats leave scent trails when they leave a feeding site. Young rats can follow these trails right to the food source.
Little breadcrumb trails, but with scent.
Kinda, yeah. And there are also residual cues, urine marks, feces,
Yeah.
deposited near or even on the food itself.
Okay. Pleasant thought.
Yeah.
But functional.
Highly functional. They act as "this is safe" messages. And if you mess with those cues, clean them up, change the food, the message is lost, and the rats immediately get cautious again.
And they reinforce these messages.
They do. They don't just choose marked sites.
Yeah.
They add their own marks, actively reinforcing the tradition. This keeps the information potent for days, much longer than the scent alone would last.
That's a whole system. But I read that none of these are considered the main way they share info. What's the number one method?
Ah, yes. This is the really surprising one. It's the food-related odors on a recently fed rat's breath.
On its breath.
On its breath, its fur, its whiskers. Other rats pay very close attention to these incredibly subtle cues.
And that tells them what the first rat ate.
Exactly. And the power of this cue is astonishing. It can completely override prior preferences, even aversions learned through getting sick themselves.
That is incredible. Just a sniff tells them this is the good stuff right now.
Pretty much. So you combine that with all the other mechanisms, the scent marks, the early learning, and you get this really robust system.
It allows the whole colony to track changes in what's good, what's bad, what's safe.
Precisely. Which is critical if you're a scavenger living in a world where food sources are unpredictable and sometimes dangerous. It's a key survival adaptation.
So, okay, rats are clearly masters of this. What does that tell us about the rest of the animal kingdom? Was Darwin just lucky guessing about rats, or was he really onto something bigger?
Oh, he was definitely onto something much bigger. Darwin was way ahead of his time on this. Social learning isn't just a rat thing. It's an extremely prevalent trick animals use.
Across the board.
Across the board. Elephants, whales, tiny ants, wood crickets, you name it. Learning about food, predators, mates. It's vital.
Do we see similar mechanisms, like the breath-sniffing thing?
We do, in analogous ways. My own student, Nicola Atten, found fish secrete food cues in their slime and urine.
Okay.
If that fish is also stressed, releasing stress chemicals, other fish learn to avoid that food. If there are no stress cues, they quickly develop a preference for it.
Clever. Indirect learning.
And bumblebees. Successful foragers bring nectar back, stored in honey pots. Others sample it, pick up the floral scent, and learn which flowers to visit. Same principle.
It really is everywhere. And you mentioned this understanding is relatively new, that science didn't always see it this way.
That's right. It's a recent revelation, really. 30 years ago, the common wisdom was that this kind of complex social learning was mostly found in, large-brained animals, primates mostly.
We knew about some specific examples, though, right? Like birds and milk bottles.
Exactly. Birds opening milk bottles, songbirds learning dialects, the honeybee waggle dance. These were known but seen as specialized adaptations, narrow things, selected for specific purposes.
Not evidence of a general ability to copy.
Right, not evidence of a widespread general competence for copying across the animal kingdom. That's the newer insight.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's talk about those famous examples then, the primates. Because they are amazing copycats, but their stories actually led science down a slightly wrong path for a while.
Yeah, they sort of cemented an intuition that turned out to be,
well,
wrong. The classic story is Imo, the Japanese macaque.
It's a potato washer.
The very same. Back in 1953, she started washing sandy sweet potatoes in a stream. Genius. And that habit spread through her troop.
And she invented something else, too.
She did. A few years later, separating wheat from sand by tossing it in water, the wheat floats, sand sinks. Clever stuff. She became famous. A monkey genius, or gifted, people said.
Maybe a bit much.
Perhaps a bit much. But her inventions definitely spread, and macaques do have many learned traditions.
And then chimps. McGrew and Whiten's work.
Yes, crucial work. They documented just how diverse chimp traditions are across Africa. Different groups have unique ways of using tools for termites, ants, honey, cracking nuts.
It's not just tools, right?
No, it extends to specific grooming styles, like holding hands overhead, or weird things like rain dances.
Yeah.
Even using specific plants, maybe medicinally.
And they learn this from parents, like the termite fishing.
Often, yes. At Gombe, young females spend way more time watching their mothers fish for termites and get good at it. The sons, less so. Clear social learning. Then you have orangutans, also tool users, with group-specific traditions for feeding, nesting, even communication.
Like the kiss squeak.
Exactly, using their hands like a sound box. And some really puzzling habits, like blowing raspberries before sleep in some groups.
Raspberries. Seriously?
Seriously. Or even cuddling little leaf dolls at bedtime in a couple of Borneo populations. We don't always know why.
Okay, that's quirky. And then the capuchins, they have some really strange ones.
Oh, the Costa Rican capuchins, studied by Susan Perry. They take the cake for bizarre social conventions. Group-specific habits, like hand sniffing.
Hand sniffing.
Yep, sucking on each other's body parts, fingers, ears, tails, and even, get this, eyeball poking.
Wait, poking eyeballs? Gently, I hoped.
Apparently inserting a finger between the eyelid and eyeball. It sounds awful, but it's thought to be a way of testing social bonds, seeing how much trust there is.
Wow. Okay, that's intense. Different groups have different weird rituals.
Exactly. Unlike, say, the rock-banging scene in some Japanese macaques, which is still a complete mystery.
So all these primate examples clearly show social learning is vital for them. But you're saying this focus also led researchers down the garden path.
It did. Because they were so impressive, it led to this widespread assumption, this intuition, that effective copying must be restricted to species like them, close relatives to us, big brains.
And that intuition
Turned out to be entirely fallacious,
Yeah.
as the source material puts it. Just plain wrong.
Okay, so if it's not just primates, and it's not just about food, how else does social learning shape animal lives? What other critical behaviors are learned this way?
Well, remember Darwin. He even suspected it happened between species. He wrote in 1841 about honeybees, maybe copying bumblebees to rob nectar by cutting holes in flowers.
And was he right?
He was. We now know that's a socially transmitted tradition among bees, copying across species lines.
Amazing. What about within a species, beyond foraging?
One of the most compelling studies involved birds, blue tits and great tits. Tor Slagsvold and Karen Wiebe did this cross-fostering experiment.
Swapping eggs between nests.
Exactly. These two species live near each other, but usually feed differently. Blue tits high in trees on buds, great tits lower down on bigger bugs. People assumed this was just instinct.
That wasn't.
Not entirely. The cross-fostered birds adopted the foraging style of their foster parents. Blue tits raised by great tits foraged low down, eating bigger prey. Great tits raised by blue tits even tried foraging upside down like blue tits and kept falling off.
Poor things. So foraging wasn't innate.
Largely learned. And it wasn't just foraging. Their nest site choices, who they preferred to mate with, even their songs and alarm calls all shifted towards the foster species.
Wow. That shows just how much of their species-typical behavior is actually learned socially.
It's profound, and the list goes on. Dolphins using sponges as tools, killer whales with specific hunting traditions like wave-washing seals off ice.
Urchin learning to shoot down insects by watching others.
Exactly. Even bedtime habits. Meerkats and honeybees have population-specific times for settling down that aren't just about the local environment.
And, less pleasant examples.
Well, chickens can learn cannibalistic habits just by observing others pecking at blood or wounds. Learning isn't always nice.
Okay, that's a sobering thought. Now here's something I found really surprising. Mate choice copying. Choosing a partner based on who others choose.
It sounds most gossipy, doesn't it? But it's incredibly widespread. Insects, fish, birds, mammals.
Including us.
Including humans, yes. And the kicker. Tiny female fruit flies do it. They choose males that other females have recently chosen. It clearly shows you don't need a big brain for this.
So it's not about complex calculation, just observing others' choices.
Right, and it can be indirect, too. In some fish, females prefer nests that already have lots of eggs.
Makes sense, just a successful male.
It does. But here's the twist. Some males will actually steal eggs from other nests and put them in their own.
No way. To look more popular.
Exactly. To boost their apparent attractiveness and lure in more females. They basically embrace being cuckolded, having another male raise their stolen offspring as a strategy.
That is devious. What's the best studied example of mate copying, though?
Probably the guppy work by Lee DeGatkin. He showed that if a demonstrator female showed interest in one male, a watching focal female would then spend much more time near that same male.
Even if she wasn't interested before.
Yes. The effect was strong enough to reverse prior preferences. A male she initially ignored could suddenly become highly desirable just because another female liked him.
The power of popularity, anything even stranger.
Well, get this. The Atlantic Molly. Here, males also copy other males' mate choices.
Okay, so males watch other males.
Yes, but here's the truly fascinating part. It led to the only known non-human example of deliberate deception to mess with social learning.
Deception? How?
A male Molly, if he knows a rival is watching him, will deliberately court a female he doesn't actually prefer much.
Why on earth would he do that?
To mislead the watching rival. to trick the observer into wasting his time pursuing the less desirable female, leaving the better female for the deceiver later.
That is astonishingly sneaky Machiavellian fish.
It really is, and it raises a huge question. If deception is possible, why is social learning usually honest? Why doesn't it break down more often?
Good question. Okay, moving on from romance. What about learning important places? Food patches, safe spots, where to mate?
Also hugely reliant on social learning. Fish are great examples again. Many species have learned traditions for specific sites, mating spots, resting spots, feeding areas that persist for generations.
Like the bluehead wrasse.
Exactly. Their mating sites on Caribbean reefs can stay in the same place for ages. Robert Warner did a classic experiment.
The cultural inertia one?
That's the one.
Yeah.
He removed entire populations from reefs. The new fish that settled established new mating sites. Okay, makes sense.
What?
But if you remove the population and replace them just a month later, the newcomers used the exact same sites as the fish that were just there.
Ah, so they learned from the immediate predecessors.
Precisely. The initial choices might be optimal, but then it becomes a learned tradition. It persists cultural inertia, even if the environment changes. Maybe those sites aren't the best anymore, but the tradition holds.
Like the Viking Greenlanders sticking to farming when the climate cooled?
Similar idea, yeah. It's compelling evidence for cultural variation in animals, driven by social learning.
And this happens even if the learned route isn't the best. Lab studies showed this.
They did, with guppies again.
Yeah.
Train some demonstrator fish to take one route to food, even if it's longer or harder. Untrained fish follow them, learn that route, and stick to it.
Even after the original demonstrators are gone.
Even then, the tradition persists. Simple processes follow the group, do what the majority does, create these incredibly stable, learned pathways.
And this applies to bigger journeys too, like migration.
Absolutely. Think about bird migration. Young birds learn routes from experienced ones. That's why projects teaching whooping cranes migration routes with ultralight aircraft worked. They were tapping into that natural social learning mechanism.
Even bees learning flight paths.
Yep. Novice honeybees rely on the waggle dances of experienced foragers to find food, rather than just searching randomly. Learning efficient routes is key.
Okay, and maybe the most critical learning of all, predators. How to recognize danger, how to escape. You can't afford mistakes there.
Exactly. Trial and error learning with predators is, well, usually fatal. One mistake and your lunch. So learning fears socially is incredibly common and important.
Rhesus monkeys are a classic example.
They are. Monkeys raised in labs without seeing snakes show no fear of them. It proves the fear isn't innate. It has to be learned.
And they learn by watching others freak out.
Pretty much. Seeing an experienced monkey react with terror screams, escape attempts towards a snake, rapidly teaches the naive monkey to fear snakes too.
Does it work for anything? Could you teach them to fear, say, a flower?
Interestingly, no. Experiments show they rapidly learn a strong, lasting fear of ecologically relevant threats like snakes or snake-like objects. But they don't learn to fear irrelevant things like flowers, even if they see another monkey acting scared of one.
So natural selection has kind of primed them to learn the right fears.
Exactly. It's biased learning tuned to genuine dangers, which is smart.
But not all animals are that selective, like blackbirds.
Right. European blackbirds seem a bit more easily fooled. You can trick them into mobbing, like a harmless plastic dottle if they see other blackbirds mobbing at first. Their fear learning seems less finely tuned.
Fascinating difference, and we're actually using this knowledge now in conservation.
We are. People like Hewlin Brown are showing young hatchery-reared salmon basically training videos, footage of predators attacking other fish.
Video nasties for fish.
Essentially. And it works. It helps them recognize and avoid predators when they're released into the wild, significantly improving their survival rates, using their natural social learning capacity to help them out.
Wow. Okay, so this whole deep dive, it really hammers home just how widespread copying is in nature. It's definitely not just for the clever or big-brained animals.
Not at all. Animals invent things, figure stuff out, and those innovations spread through social learning, sometimes creating behaviors that look an awful lot like animal cultures.
It brings us right back to Darwin, doesn't it?
Yeah.
His insight that animal behavior isn't just fixed instinct.
Exactly. It's profoundly shaped by learned, socially transmitted wisdom. The fact that copying works so well for bees, rats, orangutans, such different creatures, it's powerful proof of how useful it is.
And of course, we humans do it constantly. Think about kids picking up fears from parents or just learning basic safety rules. It's fundamental to us.
Hugely fundamental. It's an incredibly adaptive strategy, and arguably humans have taken to a whole new level.
It seems like such an obvious advantage, doesn't it? Just copy others and get knowledge quickly.
You'd absolutely think so. It feels intuitively right. Copying saves you the time and risks of figuring things out yourself.
But I sense a but coming.
There is a but. A really fascinating scientific puzzle known as Rogers paradox. For decades, it actually troubled researchers.
What's the paradox?
Mathematical models exploring the evolution of learning surprisingly suggested that relying too much on copying could be bad. It could lead to populations blindly following outdated or inappropriate information, especially if the environment changes.
So copying might stop you from adapting.
Potentially, yes. The model suggested that purely learning for yourself, social learning, might be better in the long run for tracking changes. So for a long time, scientists were scratching their heads asking, if the models show these problems, why does it pay to copy others so much in the real world?
So the obvious benefit wasn't actually so obvious scientifically.
Not obvious at all. The answer to why social learning is ultimately so successful, despite this theoretical paradox. Well, that's only become clear relatively recently. It's a great example of how even seemingly simple behaviors can hide deep